1940, the Luftwaffe launched a massive attack against our islands and suffered heavy casualties. It's a good day to recall the bravery and sacrifice of those to whom we owe our freedom. Today, Ukraine is fighting off an aggressor, and our Prime Minister has been to Washington already to urge that it should be allowed to use long-range missiles supplied by the United States and Europe to hit targets inside Russia. I'll discuss that with my political panel. A new book argues that forces on the left are trying to make us ashamed of our history. The book's title speaks for itself: The War Against the Past, Why the West Must Fight for Its History. The author, Professor Frank Furedi, will join me to explain. We'll be previewing the Tetbury Music Festival. Founded in 2003, it's a renowned chamber music event in the Cotswolds, and His Majesty King Charles III is its patron. The festival's director, Kaz Weller-Knight, will unveil this year's musical programme. And Stefan Kyriazis, the emotionally sensitive arts editor of the Daily Express, has been to the theatre, as is his wont. And this week he reviews a new production from the creators of Six, the musical, and it's called Why Am I So Single? Before all of that, your headlines with Sophie Reaper.
Thank you, Michael. It's just after 11 o'clock and these are your GB News headlines. Some breaking news this morning. 8 migrants have died overnight whilst trying to cross the Channel, French authorities have confirmed. The French Maritime Prefecture for the English Channel and North Sea said 53 migrants were on board a boat which got into difficulty off the coast of northern France. A rescue operation was launched, but 8 people were later confirmed dead. This news comes less than 2 weeks after a separate incident where 12 migrants died after a boat sank off the French coastline. It's been alleged that Sir Keir Starmer has broken parliamentary rules by failing to declare donations of clothing for his wife, Victoria. The Sunday Times has reported that the gifts came from Labour donor Lord Ali and covered the cost of a personal shopper, clothing and alterations for the PM's wife during the election campaign. Sir Keir tried to make the declaration earlier this week, but as MPs are required to register gifts within 28 days, he was too late. Speaking earlier, Foreign Secretary David Lammy defended the PM's actions, and this is what he had to say.
This is not a breach of transparency rule. It's a Prime Minister that's acting positively to make sure that everything is above board. And this money comes from a long-standing, over 2 decades. Lord Ali has been in the House of Lords. He has been a big supporter of the Labour Party. He's a self-made man, and I think there is nothing to see here, really.
And there's more potential trouble for Sir Keir's government now, as it's revealed pensioners could be left £1,000 worse off this winter. This comes on top of suggestions that Labour could also axe the single-person discount on council tax at next month's budget. The party have thus far refused to rule this out, stating that difficult decisions need to be made in order to fill the so-called £22 billion black hole left by the Conservatives. Staying with politics now, and today is the second day of the Lib Dem Party conference in Brighton, with party leader Sir Ed Davey scheduled to give a Q&A later this afternoon. The party's education spokesperson, Munira Wilson, will also give the keynote speech today, in which she's expected to ask for 900,000 additional free school meals for pupils in poverty. She'll also call for a national body for special educational needs and disabilities in an attempt to end the postcode lottery faced by many parents of children with complex needs. Today marks the 40th birthday of the Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry. The youngest son of the King will celebrate the start of his 40s at his Californian home with his wife Meghan and their children Archie and Lilibet. The Prince has said he was anxious to turn 30, but that he's excited about 40 and his mission is now doing good in the world. Earlier, royal commentator Jenny Bond wished Harry a happy birthday, but said she feels it's unlikely he'll be returning to the UK anytime soon.
I don't think he wants to come back, either permanently to live here or to have a royal role. I think he's happy with the bed he has made. I don't think that he really expected his documentaries and his book to explode quite so viciously into the heart of the royal family and create the rift that it has. But I think that he is not looking for a way back because he's very happy. He's got the freedom he wanted.
And finally, the crew of the first ever private spacewalk have returned to Earth this morning. Let's take a look at the moment that SpaceX Dragon splashed down.
And there you can see. As you can see on your screen, and by the cheers behind us, the Polaris Dawn crew has successfully splashed down.
Well, those are your latest GB News headlines. For now, I'm Sophie Reaper. More from me in the next hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you very much, Sophie Rupert. The new Prime Minister has been to Washington, D.C. twice since his election in July. This week he met President Biden to urge that the United States and European nations who have supplied long-range missiles to Ukraine authorise President Zelensky to use them against targets in Russia. Why is the British government putting pressure on the White House? And is it ready for escalation that might affect Britain? I'm joined by Matthew Lazar, former head of broadcast for the Labour Party, Alice Denby, the opinion and features editor of City AM, and political commentator Matt Stadlen. Welcome back to GB News in all cases. Matthew Lazar, why is the government's policy on Ukraine apparently the same as the previous government's policy? There's no particular reason why the Labour government should have the same foreign policy, but to me it appears rather that it does. What's the reason for that?
Well, there's no particular reason, indeed every reason why it should have the same policy as the previous government. You mentioned in your introduction that today's Battle of Britain Day. On my way to the studio, I drove past Westminster Abbey where the annual service to commemorate Battle of Britain Day was taking place. And what more stark and moving reminder could we have of the need to stand up to aggression? And I think it's right that the new government has adopted the same policy as the previous government in standing shoulder to shoulder with President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people. Therefore, I think it's right that Keir's been in Washington this week, and it's right that he's pressing Washington so that we collectively agree that both our missile system that we can supply and the missile system that the US can supply can both be used on targets in Russia. Not targets on Moscow, but targets sort of 100, 150 miles inside Russia, which are where the Russians are nightly bombarding targets in Ukraine.
Do you think that position that you've just articulated is felt as naturally throughout the Labour Party as I would say it's felt as naturally through the Conservative Party? Or would you say that Sir Keir Starmer thinks a little bit about how this policy positions the Labour Party? This was, I think, rather an obsession of Tony Blair. Foreign policy was a way of positioning the Labour Party. What's your response to that?
Yeah, no, I don't think it's a cynical political calculation. I know exactly what you mean. There's obviously always been a peace tradition in the Labour Party. Oddly, on Ukraine, well, not oddly, partly because a lot of people around Jeremy Corbyn have left, including obviously Mr Corbyn himself, but also because I think the situation is so clear-cut with Russian aggression. There really hasn't been any kind of pro-Russian sentiment in the Labour Party, which you have seen in other parties in the left. We've seen in the recent German elections, not the Social Democrats in Germany, but the party to the left of that has literally splintered on pro and anti-Russian sentiment. But no, I haven't really heard any inkling at all of anybody opposing the policy as it stands. So I don't think, therefore, it's one of a political calculation. I think it's one of a moral calculation, and that is to stand up to Putin.
Alice, what do you think the calculation about escalation that is being made by the government is? There have been a number of red lines before put down by Putin. So do you think, on the one hand, they're thinking, Putin often puts down red lines and then nothing happens, we'll call the bluff again? Or do you think, yes, there could indeed be escalation and we're prepared for it?
I think it's probably a bit of both. I think they're probably considering both options. I feel like the decision to delay, though, worries me. It suggests that there is a bit of a vacuum in Washington, that basically Joe Biden is abdicating the decision. He thinks it's not his to make. He wants to leave it to either Kamala Harris or in the hands of a much less reliable partner for Britain in Donald Trump. And I think that's a bit of a worry.
Arguing against that, why would you allow the British Prime Minister to go to the White House and have a chat about missiles if you were then going to sort of rather snub him very publicly? One feels that there must be another shoe to drop here, if you know what I mean.
There'll be high-level discussions that we don't know about. It does seem like this has been a bit of an embarrassment for Starmer. He went to Washington, with bellicose, hoping to get these missiles off the ground, and he's been, as you say, snubbed. So, difficult calculation, but it's also interesting just to reflect for a moment on how far the Labour Party has come on this. Under Jeremy Corbyn, a man who actively wanted Russia to win this war. I think I'm pleased that the government is sticking to the previous government's policy.
Matt Stadler, let's talk about escalation. Russia has talked about nuclear escalation, but we don't have to think about that. I mean, there could be escalation. We're already in a state of undeclared cyber warfare with Russia. And I suppose that Russia would be capable of stepping up that cyber warfare. And goodness knows what our defences are and goodness knows what their capabilities are. But do you think the British people are ready, for example, for the National Health Service to go down from time to time, for railway chaos? Well, maybe we're quite used to railway chaos. But you get the gist of my question.
I don't think we are ready for the NHS to go down, and I think there needs to be a laser-like focus to protect the cybersecurity, not just of the NHS, but of our other public and major institutions. Let's remind ourselves why we're talking about this. Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, is absolutely desperate to be able to attack targets within Russia because those bases are often the places from which bombs and missiles that hit apartment blocks and other targets within Ukraine are launched. And there's a very interesting dynamic. And I think it's to Boris Johnson's credit. I was by no means a fan of him overall, but I think it's to his credit that he did seem to lead the West in being steadfast in standing shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine, and Starmer seems to be doing the same. I agree, the optics do appear to be a little embarrassing for Starmer, that he appears to have come back from Washington empty-handed, but you can't blame him for trying.
No, indeed, and I certainly don't, and this panel doesn't blame him. But this incursion into Russia, of course, has other motivations as well. I mean, the campaign was stalling from the Ukrainian point of view. It wasn't taking territory back. What it has now done is to seize some Russian territory, which gives it a bargaining tool. However, it doesn't seem to have forced Russia to move troops from the main offensive to defend the Russian territory. And using the missiles that are supplied by the United States and Europe might make a difference to that. So it looks as though we're at a somewhat critical point. And I just put one point to you, that possibly the greater likelihood now that Kamala might win the election, whereas before we kind of assumed Trump would, maybe, oddly enough, has taken some of the heat off Biden. That's why he's able to postpone this decision, he thinks, because there isn't necessarily the Trump disaster coming down the road as far as Ukrainian policy is concerned.
Well, there is the worry, and I think you sort of alluded to it, that Biden may not be being as forthright as arguably he should be, because he thinks that by giving greater support to Ukraine, he could actually damage Harris's campaign because of where Trump appears to be positioned. Listen, the overall geopolitical context is highly flammable, extraordinarily febrile, and potentially very dangerous. And that comes down to a very basic core point, and that is that Vladimir Putin is a very bad and perhaps unpredictable man, and he has at his fingertips the largest nuclear arsenal in the world. And this latest news overnight that Russia seems to have been sharing nuclear secrets with Iran in return for missiles from Iran or drones from Iran that Russia is using in Ukraine should, of course, alarm us all. We have to hope that with all of this, that Putin's sabre-rattling is empty.
Matt, we hadn't mentioned this before, but of course one of the reasons that Keir Starmer and others are using for supplying Ukraine with these missiles and giving them the permission to use them into Russia is precisely because there's been an escalation on the other side. Iranian missiles are being deployed and there's been an uptick in that rate of supply. Comment on that if you would, but also would you go back to the point I raised a moment ago about how we would deal with an escalation that began to hit our public services, which is a possibility.
Yes, absolutely. But I think we're likely to see cyber attacks even without this. I mean, in terms of calling Putin's bluff, but I don't think there's any chance Putin's going to start a nuclear war. There are various staging posts, red lines that he's had that, frankly, the West has crossed in terms of its support for Ukraine, and that consequence hasn't happened. Yes, I think we might see a stepping up of cyber attacks, and we need, as Matt says, to make cybersecurity a really big priority. It's not a sexy subject for politicians to talk about cybersecurity, but it's an absolutely vital one because, as we've seen, even with the smaller level cyber attacks, we saw this week Transport for London by a 17-year-old hacker. So, I mean, if a 17-year-old hacker can do that, let's think what the Russian state can do. I'm not sure that it is a total humiliation for Keir. I think we're likely to see is that permission will be granted, the sort of agreement will be reached. We've got the UN General Assembly coming up in the next 10 days. I think it's likely that something will happen around then because that will give it a diplomatic feel, and obviously it will involve other partners who may not be directly involved with the missile systems, but whose support is necessary. So it's building that political consensus. So I think it wasn't a wasted journey.
No. Alice, would you like to comment on public resilience if things begin to get a bit tough at home? We've talked about cyber attacks, which could have quite important consequences. Russia could resume a programme of murder within the United Kingdom. That's a tactic that it has used before. Do you think the British public would be pretty resilient? Do you think the British public's shoulder is to the Ukrainian wheel?
I think at the moment the polling suggests that people are very supportive of Ukraine, but I think if the conflict starts to affect us here at home, you could see that change. I mean, we have indeed already had a cyber attack. My local hospital got attacked and it was affected for months. So, these things can be extremely damaging. But I think the point to be made is that Ukraine is fighting for the freedom of the entire West. All of our futures depends on them winning this conflict. Vladimir Putin will not stop in Ukraine. He's made that very clear. In fact, and he's attacked people on our shores. So people do need to recognise that this is a conflict in which we are involved, whether we like it or not.
Matthew, I'm going to disappoint you. I'd quite like to move on. I'd just like to ask you, as a commentator from the left, about the look of the Labour government at the moment. So lots of prisoners were allowed out last week, and one of them, it appears, has gone on to re-offend already. The Chancellor has been taking thousands of pounds in fuel payments as a Member of Parliament on her, I think, second home. It turns out the Prime Minister has been receiving money from Lord Ali for his suits, his spectacles, and his wife's clothes as well. And all of this around the time that the winter fuel allowance is being cut. How good a look is this for the new Labour government?
I think the clothes look is not a good look. I can't see why it was thought to be a good idea for the Prime Minister's wife to be dressed by someone else. And I certainly can't see why it was seen as a good idea not to declare that initially. I mean, I don't think that was deliberate. I think it was clumsy or incompetent. But it's not a good look. I've been critical of Rachel Reeves' policy on the winter fuel allowance. I think it's a political mistake, which perhaps doesn't matter that much, the politics of it, because we're at the very beginning of what could be a 5-year term. But I think it was, in policy terms, a mistake, because I do think that quite a serious number of pensioners will be seriously affected by this. But it's very, very early doors.
I can't resist asking Matthew Lazar, who was head of broadcast once. I mean, if you were there now as head of broadcast, Matthew, be tearing your hair out.
Well, if I hadn't, yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I think this is very, very clumsy. I mean, I think that what shocked me is that we had the issue about Wahid Ali having a Downing Street pass about 3 weeks ago. So you would have thought that then there would have been a pause, a moment and a check on, making sure that everything, all ducks were in line as far as everything with Wahid was concerned. I mean, Wahid's been a Labour donor for 20 years, 25 years, etc., etc. But that doesn't mean you don't have to play by the rules. We saw this rather odd clip from David Lammy.
I don't understand this point of saying he's been a peer for all these years and he's been a donor for all these years. If it's wrong, it's wrong.
And I thought we had David Lammy there saying he's a self-made man. As though if he wasn't, then it would be a problem. They need to be stop being careless on things like Wahid Ali. And then when we have the conference speech in 10 days' time, that needs to give some hope, because at the moment it's all looking a bit gloomy and a little bit sort of flailing all over the place.
I mean, to me, it's an interesting reflection. The Labour government seems to think that people who are on six-figure salaries need help with their clothing allowance. Alice, I know I haven't had you back for a second go, but we'll be here in the next hour with this panel again. So for the time being, it's thanks to Matthew, Alice and Matt, because they will rejoin me at 12 o'clock or just shortly after. Now, whilst our opinions about Russia's attack may be heavily influenced by the history of conflict in Europe, a new book argues that the forces on the left want us to feel shame about our past. Professor Frank Furedi will join me after the break. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Luis Elizondo says that he worked at the Pentagon and that he knows that they have recovered material that is not from this Earth. He resigned after believing his government wasn't taking the threat of UFOs seriously. So have they been covering up alien material from us?
I don't think the claims that are being made in Luis Elizondo's book, Imminent, are new. But I think what we have to pay attention to is the seniority of, one, Luis Elizondo, and two, the people who recruited him, and indeed the people he worked for, which was the Department of Defense and the Pentagon.
Do you think that he was in a position to know about this?
Yeah, he would have been. He would have been speaking to the individuals who were taking part in these investigations. You're showing some of those clips just now that potential incursions by objects controlled by a non-human intelligence, potentially. We're not saying alien necessarily, but something non-human.
Seems a bit far-fetched to me, Andrew. I'm a sceptic.
When people say sceptical, I think as a species, we're relatively new in terms of what we do in space. But right now, we've got a robot on Mars that drives about and has a little helicopter drone that every so often comes up, flies about away 10 feet from it to collect samples and comes back. Now, a species a couple of hundred years down the line from us would have far better technology than that. So who's to say what we're encountering aren't just really advanced probes from something else that's just slightly ahead of us in the technological scale? I don't think that's too far stretch of the imagination.
When you do see things like what we just saw there, which was made public, the New York Times did a big expose on all of this, and actually, you know, the world didn't end. We weren't all outside fighting each other for scraps of food and burning down the nearest Lidl, were we? We just thought, oh, that's quite cool.
I think now we have to look at it and maybe take a step back, look at the people coming out now, talking about UFOs and thinking, is there something to this that we've maybe been overlooking?
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Sunday with Michael Portillo on GB News. Professor Frank Furedi has long been recognised for his incisive critiques on contemporary cultural and political issues. In his latest book, titled Why the West Must Fight for Its History, he argues that we are currently facing a profound crisis of identity, exacerbated by the growing trend of historical revisionism. And he joins me now. Welcome to GB News. So would you like to set out, as briefly as possible, the argument in your book?
My argument is basically that increasingly cultural conflicts are about the past, rather than simply about what's going on now. And I became aware of the fact that just about every dimension of our past, our legacy, our cultural achievements, is now being rendered toxic by a systematic attempt to contaminate who we are, where we come from. And to me, that's a very dangerous development. And what's also very dangerous is that all of our cultural institutions, the schools, universities, museums, are going along with this. And there's very little resistance to this whole process. And if that continues, then, in a sense, people growing up in today's world will feel a sense of shame about their nation, about where they come from.
Very good. That's an excellent summary. I suppose sometimes it is appropriate for a nation to feel shame. And I'd like to put to you a couple of thoughts. I mean, when I've been to China and I found that Mao Zedong is on the banknotes, and that his portrait is in Tiananmen Square, I'm simply horrified. I believe that Mao was responsible for the deaths of about 50 million Chinese by manufacturing a famine. So there are some statues, there are some portraits, there are some aspects of history that ought to be toppled.
Yeah, I think you're right. History is always a tension between right and wrong. Britain did many things over the centuries which we shouldn't be proud of. But when you roll the film backwards and you look at the history of this nation, I think that there is a lot to be proud about. And it's not even a question of balancing good and bad. It's simply having an honest understanding that these achievements, from the Magna Carta onwards, are historically important. You cannot have an idea of tolerance without the contribution of someone like John Locke. You know, you cannot have a sense of technological progress without the Industrial Revolution. So the way that I look at it is, let's have a good account of what Britain has done, but do that objectively rather than go out of your way to make ourselves feel guilty for being British.
Yes, fair enough, but then perhaps some things should be denounced or even toppled. I mean, you rather deride the idea that someone could feel pain or offence or grievance from, let's say, a statue. But in the same way as I wouldn't want to see a statue of Adolf Hitler in Germany, why should we want to see a statue of, I think his name was Thomas Colston, the slave owner who was a great philanthropist in Bristol, and whose statue was torn down and thrown into the dockyard. I mean, even if we acknowledge that much of British history has been excellent and virtuous, and that the Enlightenment has been a marvellous thing, on all of those things, why should we object to an objectionable statue coming down?
Well, we can have a discussion about the role of Colston in the history of Bristol, and I'm not against in principle about concluding that this statue should be placed somewhere else. I think all statues should be preserved. They may be put in a place that's in a museum rather than in the middle of Bristol. But what I really objected to was that the people who tore down the statue behaved as if they were a lynch mob.
Yes.
And they behaved as if they were literally lynching this person, and they were kicking that statue, and they were laughing. And what should have been a very august, important occasion turned into this riotous behavior, which tells me quite a lot about the people who were involved in toppling that statue.
It's very interesting that you think statues should be preserved but moved. I mean, for example, forgive me, I celebrated when I saw Saddam Hussein's statue being torn down at the time of what appeared to me to be the liberation of Iraq. So was I wrong to feel joy about that? I mean, should all Saddam's statues be in storage somewhere? Should all Hitler's statues be in storage somewhere because they are historically relevant?
I'm not arguing that. What I'm arguing is that there have been statues that have been around for a very, very long time, centuries. Therefore, they're historical objects. I myself, when I was 9, living in Budapest in Hungary, saw Stalin's statue being torn down by the revolution. I was joyous. Everybody was really, really happy. That's very different when you spontaneously react to your enemy right there and then. It's very different when you basically go around, look for old statues to tear down, which is what we're doing at the moment. Museums are going through their objects, which they should be preserving, and seeing how they could condemn them. You have a situation where they're condemning old Greek artifacts on the ground that a Greek face is white, and therefore it must have meant that they were into white supremacy or white privilege. So you got this obsessive addiction to simply destroying rather than asking the question, how can we preserve what is interesting and marginalize what really isn't?
Is there a danger there, though, that we reduce the argument to the absurdity? I mean, supposing I were to concede that some of the things that are being written in museums are absurd, would that necessarily condemn the entire principle of seeing the context of an object, or of a person for that matter, differently from the way it was seen in the past?
No, but then the context we're providing is based on reading history backwards. So basically, you have a situation in the National Gallery where they're saying that Constable's painting, or an idyllic rural scene, should have a sign on it that says that Constable ignored grinding poverty. So with, in a sense, lecturing Constable as if he's one of our peers about what he should and shouldn't paint. And I think that's very different than providing context. That's basically violating the basic elements of art.
You see a particular danger in this controversy about history. I wonder if it isn't just a projection into the past of our current political positions. So, in other words, I, as a Conservative, have a feeling about the Enlightenment or the British Empire or whatever, which may be different from a socialist view of those things. It is much more happening than that people on different wings of politics look at history and see different things there.
Well, what you describe is quite legitimate, and that's always happened. But today, as I argue in my book, we've eroded the distinction between the present and the past. There's no temporal boundaries. So what's being done is we're lecturing and correcting people that lived before. So we have people rewriting Shakespeare on the ground that we've got to make his words, his language, more racist to bring out his hidden racist assumptions. That is arrogant. That is basically telling the world that I know better than Shakespeare did what was really inside his head. And that kind of basically fixing the problem of the past in the 21st century actually evades the problems of our time. But worse still, it's kind of a colonization of the centuries. It's kind of colonizing people that haven't got the ability to answer back. Shakespeare hasn't got the ability to answer back to his critics in the 21st century.
I wonder if we're also seeing a bit of balancing here. I mean, at the beginning of this programme, I mentioned that it's Battle of Britain Day. And the British are still quite obsessed with the Second World War. And one of the reasons that we are is that we see it as our finest hour. You know, this is the moment when this democracy held out. There were only 11 democracies in the world at the time, and we held out and we won, whereas the rest of Europe was overrun by fascism and by Nazism, then by communism. So, you know, we feel incredible pride in this. And not many people have criticised that position. This has been a kind of national psyche which has existed all of my life and which still seems quite strong. I mean, if you look at the television schedule, huge numbers of programmes are still about the Second World War because it makes the British feel good about themselves. So should we be so worried if a few other people, forces on the left, come along and say, well, you shouldn't feel so good about the history of the British Empire?
I think that's entirely legitimate. That's fine. But what we're seeing today is something very different. So we have a situation where Winston Churchill is systematically called a war criminal. You have an American historian who basically said that the real villain in the Second World War wasn't Hitler, but was Churchill. So what you now have is not basically saying that there were problems, that not everything was great, what happened in the Second World War. What you have is a complete attempt to render toxic what Britain did. And I think that kind of destruction of that legacy, which, better for worse, is really important, especially for young people, is being destroyed. And I would suggest that people look at the textbooks that children are given today, and you'll find that that heroic sense built about the Blitz spirit, what Britain did, is gradually being undermined.
Frank, many thanks indeed. Would you like to repeat the rather long title of your book so that people will know what we've been talking about?
So the book is called The War Against the Past, Why the West Must Fight for Its History.
And thank you very much for explaining why the West must fight for its history. After the break, I'll be joined by Kaz Weller-Knight, the director of the Tetbury Music Festival, to unveil its forthcoming programme.
Hello, good morning and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, we've got quite a mix in the weather for the second half of the weekend, some sunny spells and showers, but also some cloud and some outbreaks of rain. But there'll also be plenty of fine and dry, settled weather across the south of the country today. So after a cold start, things will be warming up across the south and southeast and plenty of dry weather and some sunny spells. Across northern parts of Wales and northern England, though, a cloudier day with some outbreaks of rain and drizzle. And across Scotland, plenty of sunny spells, but also blustery showers too. And these could be heavy with some hail and thunder mixed in there too. Now, as we head into the evening, that band of cloud and rain will still continue to slowly sink its way towards the southeast of the country. But across Scotland, well, we'll see those showers during the day. They will eventually ease away and become mainly confined to coastal areas. Across Northern Ireland, the Scottish borders and parts of northern England, we'll see some late evening sunny spells before the sun does go down. But plenty of clouds still across Wales, moving into the Midlands with still those outbreaks of rain and drizzle, and fairly cloudy to the south and southeast too. Now through into Sunday evening, we will eventually see that rain and drizzle to the south ease away, but there'll be plenty of cloud here. But across the northern areas, parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, we'll see a few more clear spells, much lighter winds too, so it is going to be turning quite cold here. May even see some isolated patches of mist and fog, particularly in rural areas. But to the south, that's where it's going to feel a little bit milder under those cloudier skies. Now for Monday, high pressure will begin to build across the country, which means plenty of fine, dry, settled conditions across the country. And where you catch the sunshine, it is going to be feeling rather pleasant and warm, particularly in those lighter winds. So generally highs of around 21 Celsius down in the southeast, but to the north, highs of 17, possibly 18 degrees.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion, Mark Meets, and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Sunday with Michael Portillo. The Tetbury Music Festival, founded in 2003 and run by volunteers, is a renowned chamber music event in the Cotswolds, and is honoured to have His Majesty King Charles III as its patron. Festival director Kaz Weller-Knight joins me now. Hello, Kaz.
Hello, good morning.
Every week at about this time, we have a guest who has attempted to make it to the studio by train, but has been beaten by the railways. And here we are, nearly 3 months into a new Labour government, and we still have chaos on the railways. So I'm sorry that you were beaten back to your home. Welcome to GB News.
Thank you very much.
Tell me, please, a little bit about the festival. It must be a success. It's been going for 21 years. This is your 21st year. It's chamber music, which many people do not regard as the most approachable form of music. What's your winning formula?
Well, that's a very complimentary thing to say. So our winning formula, we've been going for 20 solid years, celebrating the 21st this year. And I think we have stumbled across a winning formula, which is that we always bring the finest possible musicians that we can to the Cotswolds, so that for 1 week every year, we essentially have an international concert hall on the doorstep of all the people who live in the area. And people come once. Once they've come once, they keep coming back because each concert, whatever the variety, and we platform all sorts of different musicians and sizes and shapes of ensemble. Every single concert generally sends people away, absolutely having had a delightful and often very moving evening. And the other thing we do is we are so grateful for our regular supporters, many of whom sign up and become what we call dolphins, because that's the emblem of Tetbury Town. And we sort of form a very happy people who've got something in common, which is we love going out to concerts when we can. And we like actually playing our part in supporting the arts in our area. And so there's a nice sort of clubby, friendly feel when you come to the church each evening, because the venue is this beautiful, beautiful church. And it's very friendly, and you can get a good glass of wine, and you connect with friends maybe that you haven't seen for a while, because the concerts take place in October. So you sort of had a lovely summer, and winter's coming, and then you can find yourself at the church with its beautiful candlelit candelabra, and reconnect with friends you haven't seen for a few months. And so it's just got a really lovely atmosphere to it that I think people appreciate.
The photographs that have been shown while you were talking to me there, Kaz, help to illustrate what chamber music is, because not everyone would necessarily know that. So we're talking about soloists, and we're talking about trios and quartets and quintets, and I dare say the occasional singer as well. But how many musical events do you manage to pack into your festival?
Well, we sort of have got a week in the calendar. It's always the first weekend in October every year, and the days running up to it. And then a few years ago, we just grabbed the Saturday before, so that if we have got the funds and if we can find the people, we can put on more concerts if we want. But essentially, most years, it's 5 or 6 concerts and then a complimentary number of lectures from all kinds of people who we invite to come and throw some insight into some aspect of the music that's been played that year.
You've got a competition. You've got a competition on this year, which is a bit unusual. Tell me a little bit about that, please.
Well, I was thinking, I mean, last year when we celebrated 2 decades of music making, we looked back at that accomplishment, which is, very great to start something and to nurture it through its adolescence. But now at 21, I thought, okay, we're grown-ups now. What can we do to I don't know, maybe set some new goals for the years ahead? And one of the things that I and my colleagues on the board, and I know people across classical music, are concerned about, and that is we want to bring in younger people. And, we want them to enjoy classical music and understand that it's just part of the glory of music. And you can love classical music even if you love pop music too. And so I really wanted to raise our profile in the town. And a lot of the town knows that, this, acclaimed music festival really takes place every year. And we have the support of some of the businesses who provide flowers and help promote it. But I really want to see more local people, particularly the youngsters of school age, coming to our concerts. And we give them free tickets, so that sort of accessibility is there. But they're not coming in large numbers. So I thought we've got to really raise the profile within the town. And so I really thought of Chelsea Flower Show. And at the time of Chelsea Flower Show in May, every shop in Chelsea seems to be decorated with flowers, and there's this fabulous sort of festival vibe. And I thought, we need a bit of that at Tetbury. So I hit the streets and started to ask the shopkeepers if they consider taking part in this sort of musical best dressed window competition. Okay. And there was a bit of enthusiasm. And then I contacted Lawrence Llewellyn-Bowen, who is such a wonderful personality, and he's quite local to us, and asked if he'd consider coming to judge. And he literally, within the hour, said, sure, no problem, and which so generous of him. And so he's coming to judge, and lots of people are now getting involved. And the best bit of all of this is that we have a sponsor who is going to donate a sum of money to the local primary school's music department for every shop that takes part. So I've tried to create this, what we've got is a sort of virtuous circle, I think, where everyone's a winner, I hope.
That's very good, and congratulations to Lawrence on doing that. I must say, when I was a politician, I dreaded judging competitions, particularly best dressed children, things like that, because you made one friend and about 100 enemies. Just tell me one thing, how is it that the King, His Majesty the King, is your patron?
Well, he's been the patron from the very beginning, from when he was, Prince of Wales in 2003. And do you know what? I'm not quite sure how that happened.
Well,
I don't know how that happened.
I'll tell you what happened. He lives close by, doesn't he? Isn't Highgrove very close by?
he's totally there. But no, there is a story. There was somebody who was, who told him about this new venture going on in Tetbury. I'm going to get into such trouble. I can't remember what the story is. But what I do know is that when he reviewed all the patronages last year, to decide which ones he could keep and which ones he would have to sadly let go, he has recommitted. And so we are just thrilled to bits. Really, really happy with that. Yeah.
Congratulations on that, Caswell Knight, and have a fantastic Tetbury Music Festival.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Still ahead, we'll be whisked away to the stage with Stefan Kyriazis as he's been to see the poignantly titled Why Am I So Single?
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
I've got a question for you, Mr. Motivator. Each time I will try and do a Couch to 5K, and I start, and then it stops, and then I'll have another go. It's baby steps, though, for most of us, isn't it? You've got to start slow, because I also see people go out and run, do that, and then do too much, and they get completely exhausted and think, I can't do this anymore. So what is it? You have to start slowly, right? Is that fair?
Well, with everything that you do need to start slowly. But what's more important than that? You need to identify an activity that suits you. Now, the thing is, you may want to do Couch to 5K, but let's say you have a preponderance for swimming. Maybe swimming is what you really like, or dancing is what you like. You find the activity that suits you. And I have to say, you'll never see a happy jogger. They're happy afterwards. They have enjoyed the experience, but they're never happy whilst doing it. But you must start with everything.
Have you ever been out of shape, though? Because whilst I find you really inspiring, I feel as though you've always been in good nick, and therefore it's kind of come easy to you. Whereas I think, there are plenty of people who have a tendency to put on weight. I mean, I can look at chocolate and I feel like I put on weight. And it's a slog, especially if you've taken your foot off the gas for a while. Getting back into it's brutal. What do you know about that?
Well, let me just say this to you, that in the early days, and I can go back, don't forget 71 years, our activity level was much higher. But this is something that's really just happened in the last 30 years. So those 30 years, we have changed. We now spend more time in front of the computer. We spend more time sitting down. So that's why we need gyms, and we need to get up. Now, gyms don't suit everybody. And that's why I do free classes. Free club, you can join. Everyone can get access to movement in their home. But you have got to make that first step.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, you didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Arts editor of the Daily Express, Stefan Kyriazis, has been to see a new musical from the team that brought us Six. That was the show about Henry VIII's wives. Stefan, have the writers crowned themselves with glory, or should it be with their heads?
Well, this is Toby Marlowe and Lucy Moss, who did that extraordinary thing of writing the first show, Six, while they were still at Cambridge. And it did lots of kind of regional things and pop-ups, and then became this transatlantic smash. It's a lot of people have commented that it's a sort of second album syndrome. And what we've had in the end is we have a very meta show about them as writers, Toby and Lucy. We get two people with face masks, almost like ancient Greek, introducing the show as the writers. And then they pull back the curtain and we have the two characters, Oliver and Nancy, who are writers writing their second show, and they're also mates sitting on a sofa in their apartment, a bit like Friends. And then during the show, they stop the show quite often to give us flashbacks that inform where they are in their lives. But there's lots of constantly nodding and winking and talking to the audience. So what we've got is we've got a little clip of mainly Joe Foster, who plays Oliver, and it's a song called 8 Dates, and it gives you an idea of the energy and what's going on with all of that. But it's a very... I will say this, Joe basically mirrors Toby's journey. So they, through the show, he turns from he to they, has struggled with being non-binary and being part of the queer community, accepting himself, being accepted by others. And then the character Nancy in the show echoes Lucy's real-life story of losing her father. So that's all reflected in the show. But we have got a clip of Joe singing 8 Dates, which is very impressive.
Critics have said that they find the plot a bit of a mess, the theatre craft a bit of a mess, but the songs are really pretty high quality.
Yeah, this is another one of these rare ones where we're all pretty much in agreement. There was a couple of raves that were a little bit sort of outliers. But yeah, basically, the performers are stunning. Joe is absolutely incredible. Vocals range all over the place. Goes from a kind of Marilyn Monroe torch song called Shh, which is about how men are very happy to be with them, but embarrassed to be seen with them in public or introduce them to other people. But we also get big club numbers. We get a fantastic kind of tap number, which sort of mirrors doing text and sort of online dating and all that sort of thing. Very, very clever. What these guys can do, Toby and Lucy, is write music. But they can't actually... like Six didn't really have a plot. And this one, it's just a little bit like Sesame Street, kind of meets French and Saunders. It's old ground of relationships and friendships. So...
Let's move on. Let's move on. I think that's at the Garrick.
That's on at the Garrick, and it is booking all the way through until next year, well into next year. So it's got a very dedicated audience. The question which we're all wondering on this one is, can it actually translate into a wider audience? Now, something that is an absolutely huge, mammoth hit, and always has been, is Warhorse, which is it's having its first revival come reboot. So what they've done is we have new animation, we have some new music, completely new lighting designed by a company called Ammonite, which is very, very eco-sustainable friendly, but also everything's been very, very beefed up. So what I've got is, I've got a little clip where you can always hear me screaming in the background of me at the curtain call down at the New Wimbledon Theatre when they bring out the 2 horses, which is always part of the joy rather. And one of them is Joey, and the other one is Top Botch, something like that. So we've got this clip of the 2 horses, which is absolutely stunning.
So that was your little pirate video, was it?
Not pirate.
And for anyone who's not actually seen this show, we might have to tell them those are puppets. Those horses are puppets.
It's extraordinary.
I mean, I've seen them again now for the first time in years since I saw the show. They are unbelievable.
It's extraordinary. There are people inside them, and I'm not allowed to review, but I can tell you everything I saw and thought. They're the Handspring Puppetry Company, and I had 2 guys from the company sat next to me. I was at a preview. And they're made 10% bigger than a normal horse, just for impact and also to get the people underneath them, but also makes it harder for the actual actors to get on top. It's the story of a boy and his horse in Devon just before the First World War. We get the foal, which is absolutely beautiful. We have a goose, which is hilarious. And then there's a big reveal when the foal, it kind of goes dark, and then the big horse version comes out. They go to the First World War, to the trenches. Devastating, beautiful. I have to say, this revival, all I can say is it's been beefed up. You can hear that crowd, and it is touring for 18 months across the country. Please go and see it.
Thank you very much, Stephen Kirians. You're watching Michael Portillo on GB News, Britain's news channel. That concludes the first hour of the programme, but I have masses in the second half, so please don't go away. Come back in a moment and see what we've got.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good morning and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, it's going to be a fairly cloudy end to the weekend with some heavy showers in the north and also some spells of rain and drizzle for some. And the reason for this is that we have this cold front which is slowly moving its way towards the southeast of the country with blustery showers behind it. But where high pressure holds on to the south, that's where we'll see lots of fine and dry weather today. So across northern parts of Wales, northern England, that's where the front is fairly slow moving, so likely to be quite a cloudy day with some spells of rain and drizzle. Blustery showers moving across Scotland. These could be heavy with some hail, perhaps the odd rumble of thunder, but it's down across the south and southeast that holds on to the dry and settled weather, just perhaps a bit more cloud around compared to yesterday. Now, as we head into the evening, those showers generally easing away across Scotland, becoming more confined to northern coasts. Elsewhere, though, there will be some bright sunshine before the sun eventually goes down, but it's across northern parts of England, across Wales, where we'll continue to see that cloud and those outbreaks of rain and drizzle. And towards the south and southeast, still fairly fine end to the weekend, but as I say, still fairly cloudy at that. Now, as the front slowly edges its way towards the south, we'll eventually see that rain and drizzle ease, but there'll be plenty of cloud here, so a milder night on offer compared to recent nights. But it's elsewhere where we see those clear skies, much lighter winds, so that means we're likely to see a fair amount of mist and fog overnight, and it's going to be feeling chillier here as well, possibly seeing some isolated spots of grass frost in rural areas. Eventually, though, we do have high pressure building across the country, so once any cloud in the south or any mist and fog dissipates, we'll eventually see plenty of sunny spells across the country. A bit more in the way of high cloud in the northwest, perhaps some rain and drizzle around the Outer Hebrides, but otherwise lots of fine and dry weather to end the weekend.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is your
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss my big opinion. Mark meets at My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Noon has struck, and may I be the first to wish you good afternoon. Welcome to the second hour of Sunday with Michael Portillo on GB News. Lucy Letby is a former neonatal nurse convicted of murdering 7 infants and attempting the murder of 7 others. She's been found guilty in 2 trials. Is it right for Sir David Davis, the Conservative Member of Parliament, who didn't hear all the evidence in court, to campaign for a retrial? My panel will return to debate this ethical question. From Anyarin Bevan to Nigel Farage, a new book examines 6 politicians who didn't make it to number 10, but still shaped this country. Indeed, rather more than several who did serve as Prime Minister. I'll be joined by the author of the book, Sir Vernon Bogdanor, to delve into those figures' legacies. This October, a new artistic collection debuts, immortalising iconic women, including Elizabeth Taylor, Beyoncé, Princess Diana and Veronica Lake. The artists Jerry Lynch and Sequin Kay will share their extravagant artworks, each a bedazzling sight to see. And finally, in our taste of Britain, Beverly Hills Bakery London, founded in Knightsbridge in 1990, is a much-loved British-based American bakery, and it will soon celebrate its 35th anniversary. And the head chef, Rosa D'Souza, has for over 2 decades delighted the royal family, prime ministers and film stars with her exquisite creations, and she's going to come in and feed me. All of that lies ahead. But first, your headlines with Sophie Reaper.
Thank you, Michael. It's just after midday, and these are your latest GB News headlines. 8 migrants have died overnight whilst trying to cross the Channel, French authorities have confirmed. The French Maritime Prefecture for the English Channel and North Sea said 53 migrants were on board a boat which got into difficulty off the coast of northern France. A rescue operation was launched, but 8 people were later confirmed dead. This news comes less than 2 weeks after a separate incident where 12 migrants died after a boat sank off the French coastline. It's been alleged that Sir Keir Starmer has broken parliamentary rules by failing to declare donations of clothing for his wife, Victoria. The Sunday Times has reported that the gifts came from Labour donor Lord Ali and covered the cost of a personal shopper, clothes and alterations for the PM's wife during the election campaign. Speaking earlier, Foreign Secretary David Lammy defended the PM's actions. This is what he had to say.
This is not a breach of transparency rule. It's a Prime Minister that's acting positively to make sure that everything is above board. And this money comes from a long-standing, over 2 decades. Lord Ali has been in the House of Lords. He has been a big supporter of the Labour Party. He's a self-made man, and I think there is nothing to see here, really.
And there could be more trouble for Sir Keir Starmer's government ahead, as it revealed pensioners could be left £1,000 worse off this winter. This comes on top of suggestions that Labour could also axe the single-person discount on council tax at next month's budget. The party have thus far refused to rule this out, stating that difficult decisions need to be made in order to fill the so-called £22 billion black hole left by the Conservatives. Today is the second day of the Lib Dem Party conference in Brighton, with party leader Sir Ed Davey scheduled to give a Q&A later this afternoon. The party's education spokesperson, Munira Wilson, has also given the keynote speech today, in which she called for 900,000 additional free school meals for pupils in poverty. A new poll has found that more than 4 in 5 Brits believe that junior doctors should accept the new pay deal being offered by the government. The new deal would see the profession get a 22% pay rise over the next 2 years, an offer that the British Medical Association is recommending that members accept. The junior doctors have been voting since last month, with a ballot set to close later today. Today marks the 40th birthday of the Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry. The youngest son of the King will celebrate the start of his 40s at his Californian home with his wife Meghan and their children, Archie and Lilibet. The Prince has said he was anxious to turn 30, but that he's excited about 40 and his mission is now doing good in the world. Early this morning, the X-account for the royal family wished Harry a happy birthday in their first public message for him since 2021. And finally, the crew of the first ever private spacewalk have returned to Earth this morning. Let's take a look at the moment that the SpaceX Dragon splashed down.
And there you can see
Better start with this one.
As you can see on your screen, and by the cheers behind us, the Polaris Dawn crew has successfully splashed down.
Well, those are your latest GB News headlines. For now, I'm Sophie Reaper. More from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sophie Reaper. There have been outrageous cases of wrongful convictions, which of course arouse indignation and intense sympathy for the victim. It's understandable that politicians should be on the lookout for new instances of injustice. But there may be a cost. The families of the babies who, according to 2 juries, were murdered by Lucy Letby are unlikely to welcome the campaign by the Conservative Member of Parliament, Sir David Davis, to have a retrial. When should a person with an influential public position use it to call into question the results of British justice? That's today's ethical question, as I reconvene my panel, Matthew Lazar, Alice Denby and Matt Stadlen. Alice, do you share my unease, which has prompted me to raise this question today?
Absolutely, I share your unease. Lucy Letby has been convicted in 2 trials. She's been found guilty. I think people who are questioning her conviction are conspiracy theorists, and I'm surprised that David Davis is associating himself with them and with her cause.
I want as much as possible while we discuss this to think about the sort of broad ethical aspects of it rather than, the particular case. What you've just said, that this person has been convicted by a jury, of course, could be said of a number of other instances where subsequently the conviction was found to be unsafe. So for many people, it's not sufficient to say that a person has been found guilty in a trial. What, in general, then, should be the approach of a person in public life who thinks, for whatever reason, that there has been a miscarriage of justice?
I think the thing is about this specific trial, as you say, of course, there have been miscarriages of justice. We've seen that with the Post Office, for example. But with this trial, it was one of the longest criminal trials in history. Hours and hours and hours of evidence. And then there was an appeal which she lost again. And she now has, I think, no route left where she can appeal. The British justice system has done its job here. And I think calling it into question, if you're a senior position like David Davis, let's not forget, who could have been leader of the Conservative Party, I think is actively dangerous. And of course, politicians should ask questions and should champion causes they believe in. But this one, I think, is astonishing.
I think she was denied her appeal, wasn't she? I think she was denied an appeal rather than actually losing an appeal.
There were 2 trials.
2 trials.
There were 2 trials,
she
and she's found guilty in both trials. Alice, I'm going to stick with you for just a moment. What are these dangers that you perceive?
Well, I think, as I say, I think it's giving succor to conspiracy theorists. And I think that's a very dangerous path to go down.
Matt Stadlen.
The first trial, I think, was 8 months. She was convicted, Lucy Letby, of murdering 7 babies, which is an unthinkable thing to do. She was also convicted, I think, of attempting to kill a further 6 babies. I think the jury failed to reach a decision on a 7th baby, and that was what the second trial was about. I think and she was then convicted of attempting to kill that baby. I think that her lawyers wanted there to be an appeal, but the Court of Appeal denied that. So I don't think there has actually been an appeal. Now, we do have something called the Criminal Cases Review Commission, which, of course, is on the lookout for miscarriages of justice. And miscarriages of justice, I think we all agree, are some of the most difficult things to stomach in society. You think of the Birmingham 6, you think of the Guildford 4, as you say, of course, you think more recently of the Post Office scandal. But my worry here is that with such a high-profile case of a serial killer, and that is what she is, Lucy Letby, it is going to attract some experts who think they know better. It's going to attract conspiracy theorists. And in this case, and I'm a bit bemused by this, it's attracted the attention of David Davis. Now, in many ways, I find him an impressive figure, and I say that as someone actually on the left, but I'm surprised that he's taken this up. I feel for the parents who've had to go through not just the unimaginable loss and suffering of losing a child, but then, of course, the trial And that's an extraordinarily difficult thing to experience, going through it all again in a trial. So then to have people who did not sit in that courtroom day after day after day, hearing all the evidence, hearing the defence's best efforts to defend Lucy Letby, I find that really quite troubling.
James Arbuthnot did not sit through the trials of postmasters. And yet today, James Arbuthnot, who was a Member of Parliament, is something close to a national hero because he was the one who believed postmasters who came to see him, and he championed their cause, and now we found that there was massive injustice across many trials. What then should be the threshold for a Member of Parliament? Why is it that you are raising your eyebrow at David Davis and yet presumably patting the back of James Arbuthnot?
I think that's a typically very good question from you, Michael. I think in the case of the Post Office, there was, as it turned out, widespread injustice where there was a pattern of systematic failure in our politics and in our judicial system, in the way that we handle justice in this country, that led to terrible, terrible suffering of many people who turned out to be wrongly blamed, wrongly convicted. So I'm not sure that there's a direct parallel. Look, of course, if new evidence turns up that meets the threshold of the Criminal Cases Review Commission, then absolutely they should consider it. And if there is a need for a retrial in the Lucy Letby case, let it happen. I don't want someone to be falsely convicted, but I'm just not remotely convinced that the threshold is there. And I repeat, if you haven't sat through that trial, be very, very cautious about claiming that you know better.
Matthew Lazar, what Matt Stadlen has just proposed is an impossible standard, because that would mean that anyone who had not been on the jury or the judge or one of the lawyers couldn't then make a comment about a trial, and that wouldn't be a satisfactory situation either. So what should the threshold be for a Member of Parliament? What should David Davis have considered his threshold to be? Maybe you think he did have a threshold in mind and it was accomplished.
Well, I think in a sense it's up to every Member of Parliament to set their own threshold. So I disagree with David Davis on this, but I'd absolutely defend his right to raise it. And then we can decide whether or not we believe David Davis is, whether we're convinced by David Davis's arguments any more than we are by anybody else who may be making the arguments in this particular case. I don't think you can set the standard as having sat through the trial, because, as you say, that's an impossible standard. There is an issue about getting access to the court transcripts, because David Davis was originally quoted £100,000 to get the court transcripts. That's now been reduced to £9,000. I think there's an issue which I think is being raised by the Speaker about whether or not parliamentarians should be allowed to, Parliament should be allowed to get the transcripts, obviously with a fair use policy, so they're not asking for every trial at a ridiculously disproportionate cost. So, I don't believe that Letby is innocent. I think it's up to, if David Davis wants to raise it, if he wants to raise questions, he then needs to realise that he will come under scrutiny himself for doing so, and that impacts his reputation if people, if people think that he's wrong.
Is it for us to be convinced, though, Matthew? Is it for us, the public, to be convinced by David Davis's arguments here?
No, what I'm saying is, I think the public won't be convinced by them. But what I'm saying is, I'm defending his right to make the case. It might colour our view of David Davis if we think his case is wrong. His electors have the chance to make him no longer a Member of Parliament if they think that he has gone down a wrong rabbit hole, as it were, by pursuing this as one of the causes that he fights for. He's a redoubtable fighter. It's up to the electors to decide if they think it's the wrong one.
Matthew, may I ask you where you think the balance stands at the moment? If you look back over 50, 60, maybe even 100 years of history, do you think that Members of Parliament have been over-anxious to come forward to overturn the decisions of jurors, or have they perhaps been too inactive?
I think they've been too inactive. And Matt mentioned the Irish IRA cases in the 80s, the Guildford and Birmingham pub bombing, and what you saw there was Chris Mullin, who at the time was absolutely vilified. Thank goodness we didn't have social media, because you can only imagine what the response was when the IRA were committing atrocities on the mainland as well as in Northern Ireland. Across the UK, there was was feeling against him. And yet, when he was found to be right, he ended up a national hero, you know, in his diary, selling tens of thousands of copies as people thought he was a great parliamentarian, which is certainly not what they were saying at the time that he was raising those questions. Now, I'm not saying it's the equivalent with Letby, but it is. We need independent MPs who stand up, and then we can make our judgment about what they're saying against jurors, or if they're criticising a jury's decision versus any other decision in public life.
Alice, I intend to let you have the last words. So far, you've been very, very clear-cut. You think David Davis is absolutely wrong. Having listened to the debate, what other points would you like to make?
Well, I think I would just say, if we're talking about thresholds, I think the threshold would be whether you think the doubts are credible. In this case, as well, I understand there's some doubts about a particular bit of statistics that was used, but this would have been used in the context of many, many other pieces of evidence. And there's something about a medical test, but the defence did not call experts to refute this. So the court has done its job here. British justice has been served to great effect. And of course, MPs have a job to stand up when they think that the justice system has failed, but that is clearly not what has happened here.
Well, but this is interesting. You perhaps have not studied it as closely as David Davis. I don't know, you may have done. But David Davis presumably has considered that on the one hand, there was the statistical evidence, which to some extent has been questioned, and on the other hand, there were days and months of evidence of a different sort. And yet, he's raised his colours on this. What do you think is going on?
I don't know. I can't see into David Davis's mind. I think he should think about the parents and the victims in this and not whatever campaign he's waging here.
I mean, do we trust David Davis's judgment, or do we trust not only two juries, but also the Court of Appeal, who have rejected an attempt to appeal? I can't possibly decide whether someone was guilty or not because I wasn't in the courtroom. What I trust in is the British judicial system, and there have been miscarriages of justice. And as I say again, if the threshold is met for the Criminal Cases Review Commission to get involved, then I would absolutely support them in that.
I'm only smiling, if the camera caught me smiling, because I think this was quite a decent subject to debate.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, every time one says, I believe in the British judicial system, you then have to say, but there have been many...
checks and balances,
because there have been miscarriages.
And MPs raising cases is one of them.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Matthew Lazar, Alice Denby and Matt Stadlen. Coming up, Anyarin Bevan, Enoch Powell, Tony Benn, Roy Jenkins, Sir Keith Joseph and Nigel Farage have made the weather in British politics. That is to say, they've had an enduring influence without being Prime Minister. Sir Vernon Bogdanor will join me to discuss why he's written about all six.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Michael found the recipe for success without going to university. Instead, he went looking for answers inside of a kitchen. The 22-year-old has just finished a Level 2 course in professional cookery at UCB, a college in Birmingham.
When I started UCB, I was expecting to be so intense from day one, but it's not. It sort of builds up, so to the point where you get comfortable. And building that comfort is a huge part of becoming a chef, because you need to be comfortable being in your own skin.
This week, tens of thousands of students get their A-level results. The college wants them to remember university isn't the only option after school, and West Midlands Mayor Richard Parker agrees.
University is the right route for lots of our young people, but there are other pathways to getting access to qualifications that will give young people the skills they need to succeed in life.
Further education principal Rosa Wells says apprenticeships and technical courses are also great routes to a career.
Here at University College Birmingham, we offer vocational courses. These are hands-on technical courses that can give people a different opportunity, something different to school. So we've got brilliant facilities that really give students industry standard training.
A skills shortage across the UK means youngsters learning trades are desperately needed. 36% of job vacancies are due to shortages. The Labour government's new body, Skills England, has been created to bring training providers and businesses together with local and national authorities plus unions to target trade gaps and regional requirements. Michael's now finishing his qualification. Where he goes next is down to him.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. In Making the Weather, 6 politicians who changed modern Britain, Sir Vernon Bogdanor delves into the lives and legacies of 6 influential British politicians who've shaped the nation's contemporary landscape. They are Nigel Farage, Aneurin Bevan, Roy Jenkins, Tony Benn, Keith Joseph and Enoch Powell. To enlighten us on his chosen 6, I'm joined by Sir Vernon Bogdanor. Lovely to see you. Welcome to GB News. Broadly speaking, why did you pick the 6 and what was the thesis?
Because everything they said makes them still alive today. We're still discussing the issues they raised. Last week, there was discussion about the National Health Service. Now, that was Aneurin Bevan's creation. We've had a lot of talk recently about immigration. Enoch Powell was the first to raise that, and of course Nigel Farage has raised it, and it was the key cause of Brexit, which Nigel Farage championed. Then we have a lot of discussion about the market economy, which Keith Joseph championed, and there's a lot of talk about participation, which Tony Benn championed. He was the first in Britain to advocate the referendum, which is now part of our constitution. And finally, Roy Jenkins, who raised the issue of proportional representation, which, ironically, is championed by Nigel Farage, because, contrary to what Roy Jenkins hoped, it wouldn't help the centre, it would help the far right.
Interestingly, reading your book, I was struck by the fact that you and I knew, that is to say, at least had met 5 out of the 6. So in both our cases, we didn't meet Nye Bevan, but we're somewhat familiar with the others. Let's turn to Enoch Powell for a moment. You say that he raised the subject of immigration, which is indeed a very big subject with us today. Well, what Enoch said in a speech that I must say was, I think, laced with racist terminology, what he said was that he foresaw bloodshed arising from immigration. And you somewhat poo-poo that in your book. But I put it to you that a lot of people say, well, yes, there's been Islamist terrorism. There have been bombings on trains. There's been the murder of a member of parliament by an Islamist terrorist. There's been the terrible bombing of a concert involving a lot of children. But you kind of say, no, Enoch got it wrong, and there wasn't bloodshed after immigration. Do you want to explain why you think that?
Well, on the whole, and there are blemishes, of course, but ethnic relations in Britain has been a success story. If you look at his constituency, recently it was won by a Sikh, and then after that by someone whose parents came from the West Indies. And after all, we've just had an Asian Prime Minister. We could have a person of colour as leader of the Conservative Party. On the whole, ethnic relations have been a success. But of course, there are serious blemishes, and you've mentioned one of them, and that is a great problem which we have to deal with.
I'll mention a second one, which is exercising the Labour Party, which is that a number of seats that Labour thought it would win were actually won by candidates whose basis for winning was the situation in Gaza, a very sectarian position.
Well, there are strong views held about the situation in Gaza on both sides, and it's right that those who feel strongly about it, who are very hostile to Israel and to the British government's policy, it's right that they should have a voice, whether one agrees with them or not. It's also important, of course, that those who support Israel should have a voice. So I'm not terribly worried about that. And there are, after all, people far to the left of Starmer, and they should also have a voice led by Jeremy Corbyn.
Where Enoch struck me as perspicacious as well was in raising the question of sovereignty vis-à-vis our entry into what was then known as the European community, at a time when the Prime Minister, Ted Heath, was saying, no, this is all about trade, nothing to see here. Enoch was saying, no, inevitably, this is a process about ever closer European Union, and it will mean that powers will pass from the House of Commons, which mattered to him very much indeed, to other bodies over which we don't have control. And at least for me, that's what the recent Brexit referendum was about. You give marks to Enoch for perspicacity, otherwise he wouldn't be in your book, I think.
No, absolutely. And this is his main legacy, I think, that he raised this issue about the sovereignty of Parliament. He said Parliament cannot share power with any other body, whether it's Brussels going upwards or downwards through devolution. And his particular worries about the European Union, which, as you say, were perspicacious, were that we lost control of our laws, our finances, and we had to accept the rulings of a foreign court. His worries about devolution was that it was a halfway step towards separation. And towards the end of his life, in 1997, when the Blair government was elected, which favoured devolution, Enoch Powell said to his wife, they have voted to break up the country. Now, we don't know whether that's true or not. The jury is still out. But as you say, this is his main contribution.
Yes, the jury is out on all these issues. It depends over what period of time you measure them. Interestingly, I mean, Enoch is a frustrating figure because I think he was only a minister for 18 months in his life. He was a difficult man to work with. It's almost as though he refused to take ministerial responsibility. He preferred being right in his own terms and being on the outside rather than being on the inside. So some of your figures, although they have coloured the debate, they have not been very directly influential. Which one has been the most influential? Which one has bent British politics the most?
I would say the two most influential ones were Keith Joseph and Nigel Farage. And in a way, Nigel Farage is the most remarkable because until 2 months ago, his influence was exercised entirely outside Parliament. And of course, he's never been in government. But Brexit, whether you're in favour of it or not, and I wasn't, I have to confess, but it's the most important foreign policy decision we've made since the war. And without Nigel Farage, it might not have happened. And he's responsible, I think, for destroying 3 Conservative Prime Ministers, David Cameron, Theresa May, and more recently, Rishi Sunak. So I think his influence has been quite enormous. He's much underestimated as a politician.
Yes, well, I entirely agree with you. And I think your book just stops short of the 2024 general election. So we can now add also that he has reduced the Conservative Party to its lowest rump in the House of Commons since records began, more or less.
Absolutely. And if you add up the total of the Conservative and Reform vote, it's much higher than the Labour vote. It's about 39%, whereas the Labour Party got 34%. In 2019, when Boris Johnson was the leader of the Conservative Party, Nigel Farage stood down candidates in Conservative constituencies, and that helped Boris Johnson win. This time, he opposed every Conservative, and that destroyed Rishi Sunak.
Yes, and by the way, Enoch claimed that he'd put Edward Heath in 1970 and taken him out in 1974 because of the way he expressed first support and then opposition to the Conservatives. I just want to turn the telescope round for a moment and ask you this question. We're talking about people here who didn't make it to number 10 and yet were influential. Is it because those who did make it to number 10 were part of an establishment? And actually what these figures to some extent represent is an anti-establishment movement and vote. So from time to time in history, someone who may not appear very representative of the population, like Tony Benn, like Enoch Powell, like Nigel Farage, takes up a position which makes people so indignant against the establishment that they are propelled one way or another to heights that could not be imagined.
That's absolutely right. Aneurin Bevan and Tony Benn were unhappy with the post-war settlement. They wanted to push it to the left. Powell, Joseph and Farage wanted to push it to the right. Roy Jenkins was happy with the settlement, but thought it needed constitutional change to preserve it, particularly proportional representation. And that's one of the reasons why he left the Labour Party. You're absolutely right about that point. And these 6, they saw issues that other people didn't see. They were very perspicacious, as you said earlier. They were also brilliant communicators. And in my view, Nigel Farage is one of the few good communicators today in politics, certainly a better communicator than Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer, who, whatever their other qualities, are not very good at communicating with voters.
So, Vernon Bogdander, it's been a delight to hear your very clear communication today, and congratulations on the book. Coming up, we'll be discovering some towering portraits of iconic women in modern history, and each artwork is over 8 feet tall and is adorned with hand-placed Swarovski crystals. But first, your latest headlines with Sophie Reaper.
Thank you, Michael. It's 12:30 and these are your latest GB News headlines. 8 migrants have died overnight whilst trying to cross the Channel, French authorities have confirmed. The French Maritime Prefecture for the English Channel and North Sea said 53 migrants were on board a boat which got into difficulty off the coast of northern France. A rescue operation was launched, but 8 people were later confirmed dead. This news comes less than 2 weeks after a separate incident where 12 migrants died after a boat sank off the French coastline. It's been alleged that Sir Keir Starmer has broken parliamentary rules by failing to declare donations of clothing for his wife, Victoria. The Sunday Times has reported that the gifts came from Labour donor Lord Ali and covered the cost of a personal shopper, clothing and alterations for the PM's wife during the election campaign. Sir Keir tried to make the declaration earlier this week, but as MPs are required to register gifts within 28 days, he was too late. And there could be more trouble for the government to come, as it's revealed pensioners could be left £1,000 worse off this winter. This comes on top of suggestions that Labour could also axe the single-person discount on council tax at next month's budget. The party have thus far refused to rule this out, stating that difficult decisions need to be made in order to fill the so-called £22 billion black hole left by the Conservative government. Today marks the 40th birthday of the Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry. The youngest son of the King will celebrate the start of his 40s at his Californian home with his wife Meghan and their children Archie and Lilibet. The Prince has said he was anxious to turn 30, but that he's excited about 40 and his mission is now doing good in the world. Earlier, royal commentator Jenny Bond wished Harry a happy birthday, but said she feels it's unlikely he'll be returning to the UK anytime soon.
I don't think he wants to come back, either permanently to live here or to have a royal role. I think he's happy with the bed he has made. I don't think that he really expected his documentaries and his book to explode quite so viciously into the heart of the royal family and create the rift that it has. But I think that he is not looking for a way back because he's very happy. He's got the freedom he wanted.
And finally, today is the 84th anniversary of the Battle of Britain, a military campaign that was seen as a turning point of World War II. The British Royal Air Force fought the German Luftwaffe in the skies over the UK, with the Brits claiming a victory that is now commemorated each year on the 15th of September. Those are your latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophie Reaper. More from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello, good morning and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, it's going to be a fairly cloudy end to the weekend with some heavy showers in the north and also some spells of rain and drizzle for some. And the reason for this is that we have this cold front which is slowly moving its way towards the southeast of the country with blustery showers behind it. But where high pressure holds on to the south, that's where we'll see lots of fine and dry weather today. So across northern parts of Wales, northern England, that's where the front is fairly slow moving, so likely to be quite a cloudy day with some spells of rain and drizzle. Blustery showers moving across across Scotland. These could be heavy with some hail, perhaps the odd rumble of thunder. But it's down across the south and southeast that holds on to the dry and settled weather. Just perhaps a bit more cloud around compared to yesterday. Now, as we head into the evening, those showers generally easing away across Scotland, becoming more confined to northern coasts. Elsewhere, though, there will be some bright sunshine before the sun eventually goes down. But it's across northern parts of England, across Wales, where we'll continue to see that cloud and those outbreaks of rain and drizzle. And towards the south and southeast, still fairly fine end to the weekend, but as I say, still fairly cloudy at that. Now, as the front slowly edges its way towards the south, we'll eventually see that rain and drizzle ease, but there'll be plenty of cloud here, so a milder night on offer compared to recent nights. But it's elsewhere where we see those clear skies, much lighter winds, so that means we're likely to see a fair amount of mist and fog overnight, and it's going to be feeling chillier here as well, possibly seeing some isolated spots of grass frost in rural areas. Eventually, though, we do have high pressure building across the country, so once any cloud in the south or any mist and fog dissipates, we'll eventually see plenty of sunny spells across the country. A bit more in the way of high cloud in the northwest, perhaps some rain and drizzle around the Outer Hebrides, but otherwise lots of fine and dry weather to end the weekend.
Sunday nights on GB News. From 6, Neil Oliver. At 7, it's Free Speech Nation with Andrew Doyle. At 9, Mark Dolan. And at 11, get set for the week ahead with headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Welcome back. In October, a new collection of portraits will be unveiled, which record some of the most impactful women of modern times, including Elizabeth Taylor in her role as Cleopatra, Beyoncé, Princess Diana and Veronica Lake. The pieces were created in tandem by the artistic duo Sequin Kay and Jerry Kinch, and they join me now. Hi. At some point, we're going to reveal that you brought a work of art into the studio. Just before we do that, Jerry, tell us a bit about how you got into making these portraits.
Yeah, so Sequin and I have been walking in and out of each other's lives for like 9 or 10 years now. And although our art is very different to my art, we've always sort of said we'll do something together, you know. I mean, our work with crystals is so different to my traditional oil painting. And it's like, you know, they say the East is East and West is West and never the twain shall meet. But we kind of proved an exception to that rule. And we've done something here quite unique, you know.
Yeah, quite unique, which we'll see. And you in your time, you have painted pub signs and you have gilded. You've applied gold leaf.
Yeah, I gilded the whole of the Asian room in the British Museum, obviously with some help. But yeah, that was quite a task. But painting's been my whole life, you know, ever since I was a child. You know, it's been something that's always kept me in good stead, you know. It's something that I think jumped over from my grandfather. He was a painter of the churches in Ireland, and ever since I was a child, I just painted naturally. And you know, it's always been a way for me to earn a living as well.
Sequin, as I speak to you, I hope we're going to reveal a portrait that has been brought in. This is a 6-foot portrait of Veronica Lake, and to Jerry's work, you have applied what I would call sequins. Swarovski crystals. How do you apply them?
OK, so yes, the Swarovski crystals have been applied one by one in sort of a meditative state. And I use a syringe with the strongest glue in the world and also some little tools. And they're just placed on one by one. Some of the crystals are 1.5 mil, some are 3. So it's sort of like a modern-day pointillism, I would say.
A modern-day pointillism. I'm not sure that our camera can do this justice, because what we have is very powerful studio lighting. When you turn the lighting down, you see that this picture absolutely glimmers, because every part of Veronica Lake's dress here is covered in crystals. Would you like to estimate how many crystals you put on there?
I mean, it's over 60,000 crystals on this portrait.
Absolutely astonishing. It didn't begin with Veronica Lake, it began with Cleopatra, Jerry.
That's correct, yeah. So we obviously we had to decide. We wanted to do something together, and we had to decide. And we saw this picture of Cleopatra and the mysticism, the magical thing, the whole thing about the Egyptians and the pyramids. And Cleopatra looked so fantastic. Elizabeth Taylor looked so fantastic playing the part. And we just thought this was a great one to start on, so we started on Cleopatra, and it just evolved from there, and it's very much a woman's empowerment thing. It's like four iconic paintings of women, and each one has got its own energy, and the energy in each one is very powerful, and yeah.
How did you decide on the others, Sequin?
I would say that they actually came to us.
Mm-hmm.
The images jumped out at us. They came to us. We would, they would just come through looking at images, and you just felt this impact, and this is the one. It needs to be brought to life with oil and crystals. So it's very intuitive.
And your others are Beyonce, Princess Diana, and we've been talking about Elizabeth Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the junior picture of the lot, isn't it? Because this one's only about 6 foot tall and the others are 8 foot tall.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah,
we
correct.
went big.
Yeah.
We went big.
So when you put the 4, is it 4?
There's 4.
When you put the 4 together, this is going to be quite impactful, as indeed the women were themselves. You're going to put them together in an exhibition soon, I hope.
Yes, in a month from now, we are having an exhibition in central London, and we're in those planning stages, yes.
So we don't have a venue to announce yet. How can people who may have been very struck by this picture, how can people follow up? How can they know where your venue will be in due course? Is there a website?
Yes, on my website we're going to announce the location, and that's sequinkart.com.
Sequinkart.com.
Yes. .com.
Is this the beginning of something, Jerry? I mean,
we really
four women is too few, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's been a long time coming. Now the stars have lined up, the planets have lined up, as they say, and so it's happened now, and we look forward to taking it much further. Different avenues. The crystals have got so many different outlets that for us to work on, and we're looking for a much longer journey.
I feel very lucky that you brought Veronica Lake in. I mean, she really is one of my, one of the stars.
She's fantastic.
That most draws my eye and my attention.
Yeah.
Particularly that fantastic blonde hair cascading over her right eye.
Yeah.
Absolutely fabulous.
Yes.
So, many thanks to you both, and I hope you have the most fantastic exhibition. And thank you. It must have been quite a struggle getting Veronica into the studio, but it was well worth it from my point of view.
Can we just say very quickly, we was looking for a fifth icon, and we couldn't think of a better icon than Michael Portillo. So I was asked at the last minute to do a quick portrait, and I just wanted to
so much.
I wanted to, So
that is absolutely marvellous. No sequins for me, but quite rightly, no crystals on me.
Yeah.
That is absolutely fantastic. There I'm clutching my Bradshaw's Guide with the steam engine behind, and judging by the hat, I was almost certainly in Australia. That is so sweet of you.
Great
both.
stuff.
That's really
Fantastic.
very kind, and you've marked it on the back
Glad
as well.
you like it.
So,
fantastic.
Even more thanks than I expected to Jerry Kinch and Sequin K. Stay tuned, because after the break, I'll be indulging in a delightful selection of the finest American baked goods.
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
I'm now joined by a truly inspirational man. He's an endurance runner, Ben Smith. 401 marathons in just 401 days for mental health and well-being. He was spurned on after being bullied as a child, was able to raise a whopping £250,000. I'm pleased to say that he joins me now. Right, so this was a while ago, wasn't it?
Yes.
How long ago was it?
Well, we're coming up to, I think next year, roughly about 10 years since we started it. In 2026 will be 10 years since we finished.
So when did you run the marathons?
So it was between 2015 and 2016, over the course of 401 days, all around the UK.
What kind of madness was that?
Oh, it was an adventure, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, on day one when we started in Bristol, never ever thought that the project would ever become what it became. But over the course of the 401 days, we ran with 13,500 people within 8 miles of everywhere on the British mainland, from Land's End to John O'Groats. So,
and that was the journey from Land's End, John O'Groats?
Yeah. We covered so many different communities around the UK because I suppose the reason why I was doing it was to raise so much money for 2 anti-bullying charities that we wanted to include people in that. And yeah, I got to run in some amazing places.
I bet you did. What would you say is a beautiful place? I mean, the whole country, I love this country, but there are some outstanding, beautiful areas around. What would you say?
Oh, definitely.
Where's the best place that you run?
Well, I think I've got a few, but I think I would say probably the Highlands of Scotland.
I knew you would say somewhere like
that. Yeah, just the kind of vastness of it, the dramaticness of it. I remember running up and down one of the paths in the Highlands near Glencoe and coming face to face with a wild stag. So it was quite scary.
What did it do?
It did nothing. It did absolutely nothing. It was quite used to people because of the path.
What are you doing here? This is my house.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss my big opinion. Mark meets and my take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Founded in 1990 in Knightsbridge in London, the Beverly Hills Bakery offers some of the finest American baked goods in the United Kingdom. Beverly Hills Bakery has delivered gifts to all the UK Prime Ministers of the last 20 years, with, I think, the exception of Sir Keir Starmer so far, and provided gifts for the royal family and for royal births. As we near the 35th anniversary of the bakery, I'm joined by the owner and head pastry chef, Rosa de Souza, and Manuel de Souza, who is the director of the Beverly Hills Bakery. How marvellous to you both. Welcome to GB News.
Thank you for inviting us.
So, why has this formula worked? Why did London need a Beverly Hills Bakery?
Well, I think it's the originality of the concept. So, what we do is we're a bakery, but underlying it's actually a gifting experience.
Right.
So this is an alternative to flowers. So in terms of concept, that has maintained its originality despite going on for 35 years. And in fact, what I do is I often ask myself, why is it going strong? To remind myself to focus on those things that we need to focus on.
So instead of sending a bunch of flowers, you send a beautiful box of cakes like that, or a confection like that, complete with bunnies and so on.
Exactly. So you have the concept on the one hand, but you also need the quality of product that goes inside. And I think that's where Beverly Hills Bakery has got a great product.
And it's where Rosa comes in, isn't it?
Yes.
So when did you start to bake? Did you start to bake domestically in your home, and did it spread from there?
We started from home. My mother's baking, where we didn't have all the stoves and things like that. We baked on the charcoal, like the grease.
Yes.
And we started baking. I learned from my mother the baking. And then I was just interested in
What put the Beverly Hills in it? Did you ever live in Beverly Hills? Is there a Beverly Hills style?
No, not at all. It's just...
I think Sorry, can I interrupt? I think the concept is an American one.
Yeah.
So hence the name. And when we first moved to the UK in the 90s, we actually came with a Danish theme because Rosa was educated in Denmark.
Right.
And then it morphed as the coffee shop boom took hold in the UK. We started supplying more American products, and that's how it evolved.
Maybe try something. For example, I see you've got exposed there. Is that a pecan pie? Is that
Yes.
a pecan pie? Is there any possibility we can try a pecan pie or maybe open some of these boxes?
Yes.
What would you like to do? What would you like to show me?
Okay, first, just...
Opening the tin. Oh, look at that. Oh, my goodness, what a display.
Yeah.
So this is a lovely mixture of what? Cupcakes and...
muffins.
And muffins.
Brownies.
Brownies.
Yeah.
Absolutely super. What would you like to choose, or what would you like to recommend to be?
So there are different flavors here. We have a chocolate, blueberry, strawberry and chocolate, brownie, lemon.
Let me go. Is that a strawberry one there?
That's a cranberry.
Cranberry will do beautifully. I can take this cranberry one out
Yeah.
because it's so attractive. The fruit is bursting out of it.
Yeah.
But will you help me, guys? Will you eat something as well?
Oh, yeah.
So that
I'll take the blueberry.
not just being greedy
So we can
here
dissect
on
it.
my own.
And you take the chocolate.
Be careful, I'll eat on the lid, not
So
try to mess.
what kind of scale are you at now, Rosa? How many of these lovely things are you baking?
And we bake a lot. I mean, we supply everywhere in London, and we supply we supply as well to Europe, to
How
America.
did it come that you supplied the royal family?
Yes, to the birds and prime ministers, and I supply to Boris Johnson.
Not Becker.
Boris Johnson was once ambushed by a cake, but it probably wasn't yours. I don't know. Was it your birthday cake that ambushed him, the birthday cake?
No, it was more for his children, when he was giving birth. That's what we supplied, this gift for babies.
So that's all very, very pretty. Tell me about that pecan pie. I don't think we're going to be able to eat it because I don't see any way of cutting it up. But tell us about that lovely pecan pie. That's a very American thing.
Yeah, that's American. We usually are very busy during American Thanksgiving Day. So we do a lot of pumpkins and pecan pies. So that's our best seller for the Thanksgiving.
I'm going to have a brownie, I think.
Yeah.
Tell me the secret of your brownie. Makes your brownie very, very special.
Everything is sorry.
I'm making you eat and talk.
Yeah. It's
Oh,
all
cool.
freshly and chocolate, real chocolate involved in that. And we bake, I mean, it's also baked freshly.
Of course it is. A taste of all that. What do we put inside it? What nut is that?
It's walnuts.
A walnut.
Walnuts and chocolate.
You're originally from Tanzania. Is there a baking tradition in Tanzania?
Tanzania, they have things like mandazi, kitumbua. That's very different from this one here.
But you have adapted to this absolutely brilliantly. What are the plans? What are you going to do differently in the future?
Is that addressed to the two of us? Or?
Yeah.
Maybe you.
We're going to expand the business on slightly different lines, more on the cake sector. But we are also going to focus on going more international with the tins, with the muffins, cookies, and brownies. We're actually sending these back to the States now.
Right.
At Christmas, on any given day, I think we've sent about 100 to the US in a day, so 100 of these tins. That's the area that we're going to expand on, because we've kept quite low-key in terms of getting our brand out there, but feel now is the time to promote the business.
There's an expression about sending coals to Newcastle, and you are sending American baked goods to the United States. So congratulations on that, the Beverly Hills Bakery. Up next, it's going to be The Weekend with Dawn Neeson. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
Susan.
Yeah.
And thank you to all my guests today, all of those who managed to make it into the studio. I'll be back hosting this programme in a few weeks' time. I shall miss you while I'm not on the show, but I shall very much look forward to my return. And thank you for being with me on Battle of Britain Sunday. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, as we head into next week, we have high pressure building, so that means plenty of fine and dry weather around and some fairly warm days on offer too. For the end of the weekend, though, we do have this cold front which is slowly edging its way towards the southeast of the country, and that's bringing in some cloud and some outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Now, as we head into the evening, there will still be some rain and drizzle towards the south, but it is generally easing and should just be largely cloudy, and that means it's going to be a fairly mild night compared to recent nights. To the north of this, though, plenty of clear skies and light winds, so we're likely to see some mist and fog develop overnight, particularly in northwestern parts. And it's going to be fairly chilly too, so in rural areas likely to see some spots of grass frost. So as I say, to start Monday morning, there should be plenty of fine, bright weather around, but there's likely to be some mist and fog in places as well, particularly in those rural spots. So even though there'll be bright sunshine, do take care for the Monday morning commute, particularly in northern parts of Wales, northwest England, where there could be some quite dense fog in place.